the tool itself covers 4 different areas. Product costing, whether it's a make or buy part, we handle them differently, but we do handle complex assemblies, complex systems, all the way down to standalone parts. We do tool costing. This would be injection molds, high pressure die cast molds, sandcast parts, or the molds even for sandcasting, injection molding, compression molding, all of those tools we handle in the system. We also have a profitability module, and a lot of companies utilize this to analyze P&L, cash flow, and then they have their own financial KPIs that they measure and they try to hit. So it's used primarily to set pricing. And then what we've recently added, this is really a big pull out of Europe, is a carbon footprint calculator that runs in the tool. This was added not so much as to compete with LCA tools, but to allow companies to optimize cost and carbon footprint and balance the two together during the development cycle. So I talk a lot about data, and near and dear to my heart, but data drives everything. So this slide talks about Teamcenter product cost management in the middle. And the way it's driven is we bring, I'll call them 2 sets of primary data into the tool. When you're costing the part that you're making in-house, you need to bring in the raw material cost, purchase part cost. Sometimes, and we represent this with an ERP tool, sometimes you have routings that are done in the ERP tool. You bring in your plant costs, labor rates and burden rates, you bring those in, and exchange rates. And that data resides in the tool at all times and is kept fresh primarily at whatever cadence the customer feels they need. So a customer of this system, this cost tool. But an example would be raw material cost, quite often updated every 2 weeks. Purchase part cost, updated every 2 weeks. Plant cost maybe twice a year. Exchange rates, I've seen that as, driving a lot of cost change, but I've seen exchange rates weekly updated in the system. And so everything is stored in the system by effectivity date. So in theory, I could have updated all my cost here, put it in on October 9th, 2025, but I could create an estimate and date it 2023, and I would go back and pull data in from 2023. But it's pulling whatever's relevant to that date that you're putting into the tool. And then when a company's costing the parts they're making, what we supply is data from around the world that's needed from different regions that a company wouldn't have access to. So raw material costs for 10,000 different material specs and overhead costs with those. We also bring in regional labor rates, regional cost data, labor rates, floor space cost, energy rates, interest rates from 550 regions around the world. So Mexico might have 14 different states that we're bringing data in from. And then we also have a machine and process library in the tool. And that's all utilized, all of this data combines to actually calculate a burden rate for each operation in the cost calculation. And I'll talk about how we get to that point. But basically, you have data for costing the parts that you make in-house, data for that you're costing the parts that you're purchasing. And then recently, we've integrated to 2 other Siemens systems. Siemens Digital Logistics, which allows us to send a bill of material into that system. It will provide a calculation for the transportation cost, as well as the carbon footprint data or calculation for that transportation itself. So it's made the capability of conducting landed cost analysis much easier. And then recently we have also integrated into SupplyFrame. And for electronic component parts, what SupplyFrame is a giant million-part database, millions of parts in the database, live database of electronic component parts, things like integrated circuits, diodes, anything. And what that does is allows us to send in, again, a bill of material for, let's say, a PCBA. And if I don't have access to those part numbers and the pricing, SupplyFrame will provide me with pricing for those at different levels. And I can control my analysis of that pricing. But so this is how we get all the data in the system, or we access external data. And then what I'll talk about here next is what do we bring in at the time of the quotation. In this case, we reach out into PLM or Teamcenter. We're bringing in for the part, the bill of materials, the bill of process, any CAD data that exists that can help us develop that cost estimate. And maybe none of this exists. Maybe it's just a verbal description of the part, the new part. and we can always begin the costing process with a surrogate in the system. So during the development cycle, we manage that cost throughout that cycle, from concept through launch of the part. And then a lot of companies are using the tool to measure post-launch results, which are very important to bring those results back into the tool to increase the fidelity of our cost calculations going forward. Okay, and then finally we focus on how do you use the cost estimates when you're done. Do you use that should cost estimate of a purchase part for negotiation with your suppliers? Do you quote to your customers with a part that's manufactured in-house? Do you have data feeding a management report or dashboard? We can easily get data out of the system for different uses. But this is important because it shows the use of the data and the use of the cost calculation itself.